Good morning and welcome to the latest Tree Council webinar to mark National Tree Week 2024. Ireland once had over 80% woodland cover, so most of our inland bird species were originally woodland birds. Even though many of these have adapted to living in our gardens and parks, their nesting, feeding and breeding behaviour is that of a typical woodland species. A reduction of our woodland cover to an all-time low of about 1% caused the extinction of some woodland birds, such as the Capercaillie, Goshawk, red kite, and the greater spotted woodpecker. But the situation is never static, and Éanna Ní Lamha will outline this in an illustrated presentation. Éanna is a former president of the Tree Council and former president of Untashka, and is well known on radio and television for talking and discussing all matters to do with Irish wildlife. So Éanna, I'll now hand over to you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Brendan, for that fine introduction. Hopefully now I can make all this work. We have been doing all kinds of practicing on it, so it should be okay. Now, woodland birds, as Brendan said in the introduction, which of course I wrote, that Ireland was covered in woodlands, and woodlands is actually our natural habitat. If we all went away and closed the door and never came back, most of the countryside would turn back into woodland. Our fields and hedges, all of those things on the good land would all turn back into woodland, and we'd only have other types of habitats where woodlands couldn't exist, like by the seaside or on the tops of mountains or in lakes and bogs and places like that. So the natural habitat in Ireland is woodland, and as a result then, the animals and plants that are in woodlands are typical biodiversity. Now, this is a picture taken 10,000 years ago in the middle of at the end of the last ice age. Hadn't we great cameras in those days, and the ice was right up to the tops of the mountains, and the bits of the mountains that stuck out at the top had a wonderful name. We used to enjoy the name in school. It was called a nunatak, and the nunataks were up above the snow, above the ice, but everything else was gouged out by the ice. Now, of course, this is not ice, and this is not a picture of the ice age in Ireland. It's just a representation of it. These are clouds, but you can see the same idea. Nothing could live in the place at all. And then as the weather ameliorated and things got warmer, the ice began to melt, and as a consequence, Ireland was exposed to, first of all, tundra type vegetation, and finally then, after about 1,000 years, we had reached our climax vegetation, which was woodland. And of course, as well as that, we had become separated from Britain and from mainland Europe. We were, in fact, an island. And the different types of woodlands we had in Ireland really depended on the soil that the trees were growing on. And we had typically 3 different types of vegetation, of woodland vegetation. We had the stuff on the good soil, which was typically the canopy was elm and ash. On the acidic soils, we were talking about holly and oak as a canopy. And then, of course, right up on the mountains, we had pine woodlands, Scots pine woodlands. And that was the situation for about another 4,000 years, until, in fact, we again had a big change about 5,000 years ago, where it became colder and wetter, and sphagnum moss began to grow, overwhelming the trees that were up on the mountains, and those pine forests disappeared. Now, at that time, we had Neolithic people coming to Ireland as well, who were clearing land for farming. We have evidence of this over on the Gauger fields. So between one thing and another, those pine woodlands entirely vanished, and we just have left now in the bogs the leftover bits of bog deal and things like that you see on the blanket bogs if you cut turf in the west of Ireland, the remains of those trees that were underneath the turf and didn't rot away. So how does that leave us then from a point of view of the animals that live there? Well, you had in the woodland, you had all sorts of things, because the woodlands fulfilled what is the requirement for any living creature. Indeed, you need food, you need somewhere to shelter, and indeed you need to be able to have a facility to breed as well. So these are the different types of woodlands we're looking at, and I'm going to show you some birds at last. Now, this one here is a thing called the Capercaillie. And the Capercaillie was a great joke altogether. It was as big as a turkey. Look at the size of the thing. And this was in our woodlands, in our pine woodlands in particular, but in our woodlands in general in Ireland, right up to medieval times. Now, you'd think something the size of this would be pretty obvious, but for a long time it wasn't really known whether we ever had a Capercaillie in Ireland at all or not. It's in Scotland, all right, and they reckon the word Capercaillie, Capercaillie, is a Scots Gaelic word. I don't know, it sounds very ordinary Irish to me, but then I've Donegal Irish, so I suppose that's the next best thing to Scots Gaelic. So couple was referring to the racket that the male made when he was courting. They, like these other members of the grouse family, they have a lek. The males all join together and show off and run around and make awful noises, and the women come along and fold their arms and say, huh. But anyway, this is the way this type of bird will mate. And this noise that it made during the lek sounded like horses' hooves galloping. One of the reasons why it was called that. It was also called cock of the wood. And then there was great misinterpretations in the different things that were written down. Was cock of the wood a woodcock, or was it this particular bird? But they found bones of it eventually in the middens that were found in Mount Sandal, which go way back 8,000 years. But then when they got the right in it, or they did more research, they found them right up to bones, right up to the times of Woodkey, to the times of the Vikings in medieval Dublin, which is just about 1,000 years ago. So this bird was in woodlands until that time. And obviously a fine big bird like that would make a fine dinner. And one of the reasons it became extinct so early on, when we still had plenty of woodlands left, they reckon was human grabbing it for the pot and that sort of thing. So I don't think there's any talk about bringing the Capercaillie back, but it was some yoke to have in the woodlands, all right, indeed. You'd certainly know if you met one of those. Now, this is another woodland bird that is also extinct, and this is a hawk called the goshawk. Now, it's not extinct in the whole world, but it doesn't occur in Ireland any longer. And again, this is like a sparrowhawk on steroids. It's absolutely huge, much, much bigger than the sparrowhawk. This is the male and this is the female. And females in these birds are bigger and stronger than the males. And what we're looking at here is a bird that had its nest in woodland trees. And from those nests in the trees, then it was able to predate on smaller birds. Again, like the sparrowhawk, that kind of a family, it would catch birds more so than small mammals. We would expect things like owls to find small mammals. These goshawks fed on caught smaller birds with their very strong talons. Now, this was at a time in Ireland when going falconry was the thing, and you had a falcon, you had a bird of prey, you had it on your wrist, and you were able to show off how it was a sport that was carried out by the nobility and the gentry and all of those way back in the time of kings and all of that sort of thing. So if you were a very important chief or a very important king, you would have a very important bird like the goshawk. So the goshawk actually became a unit of rent. So you paid your rent in one goshawk or two goshawks. So this was a stock and trade, and gave the goshawk a particular type of value that wasn't associated with other birds. It was obviously the cat's whiskers altogether to have as a bird of prey. And again, it lasted quite a long time. It lasted right up to the 1600s, in fact, when I suppose the old Irish gentry were going with the enemy's faster gone I than the flight of the earls and all of that, and the old ways were changing, and you couldn't get away with paying your rent in goshawks any longer. And indeed, then the woodlands, the great tracts of woodlands where these places were habitat for such big birds like this, were becoming broken up and diminished as well. So we have no further records of goshawks in Ireland breeding from that time. Occasionally we get a migrant one, but in general, people send me pictures of sparrowhawks and say, "Is this a goshawk?" But there's no question of the thing that you see in your bird garden in Dublin, eating a sparrow or eating a magpie if you're lucky, is anything like the huge goshawks that were there then. Wonderful birds of prey. So they're kind of Amshakacha. They were the glories of our woodland birds, if you like. Now we had other glories as well, and I'll come to them in a little while. But what I want to talk about now is the woodlands as a habitat for birds. Now, as I said, there in the 1600s, as we all know, the amount of woodland cover in Ireland greatly diminished for all sorts of reasons: pressure on land, increasing population, Cromwellians, plantations, all of these different things caused our woodlands to be reduced. And therefore, a lot of the birds that lived in the woodlands had two choices. Like the goshawk, they could go extinct, or they could slum it and go and live in lesser quality places like hedgerows and gardens and things. Or you could hang in there and hope for the best. So some of them did actually stay in the woodlands. They were not lowering themselves to go and live in a hedge. But at the same time, they became scarcer and scarcer as the woodlands that were big enough to maintain them became smaller. But one of these typical birds, and it's still around and it's really, really lovely, is this one here, the jay. Now, the jay is a member of the crow family. It's like a posh magpie or a posh raven or rook or something like that. But it's a woodland bird, and it only occurs in woodlands. And again, you can see the lovely blue feathers on it. Sometimes if you're walking in a woodland, you might come across one of these nice blue feathers. And these jays then feed on acorns in the autumn time. And they very cleverly save them up so they can have them in the winter time as well. And they bring them all lots of places and hide them away one at a time. And remember indeed where they hid them, which is very good as well. So they depend a lot on the acorns. If they don't need every single last one of them when the winter is finished, by planting out these acorns, by hiding them in holes in the ground, jays are very much instrumental in keeping woodlands going because of the way that they feed on these. Now, you couldn't mistake a jay for anything else, and it has a screech like the magpie, only more so, if you like. If you're in the woodlands and hear something that reminds you of a magpie, but it isn't, it's the jay. Now, this is another one of our birds that live in woodlands, no messing. This is the long-eared owl. Now, we have two owls species in Ireland that breed, and only one of them is a woodland one, and the long-eared owl is the woodland one. That's their baby woodland, their baby long-eared owls. They haven't got their ears yet. In fact, the ears are not ears at all. Those things on top of their heads are actually feathers. Just suppose they get long and like that when they're in the breeding season. It makes them look more attractive. The babies don't have them. They hear with these satellite dishes. You can see the roundy faces they have, and it's through that, like a satellite dish you might be receiving television from. And that's how they actually get the sounds, because these birds, these owls, hunt at night silently. They're out at night, and they, of course, are feeding on mammals. So they're going to pounce silently down through the vegetation. They've feathers right down to their toes. Most birds have scaly legs. If you think of your chicken, they're halfway from the knee down, it's all scaly. But not in the case of owls. They've feathers right down to their toes. And this absolutely muffles the sound that they make. So they hear the rustling of the mice or the rat in the woodland, and down they come and pounce on them. So they are entirely woodland birds. And again, they will nest in holes in trees in woodlands, and they are much more common than the barn owl, which wouldn't be hard because we've hardly any barn owls. But they are the more common of the two birds, of the two owls that we have. Now, here's another bird that only lives in woodlands, and this one, it's not, the slide is not upside down or anything. This bird is able to do all kinds of acrobatic things. This is a tree creeper, and a tree creeper lives in the woodlands, and it creeps up along the trees, holding on with its claws, holding on, perching itself up with its tail. It has a wonderful little curved bill, and it'll run up and down the branches of the trees. Now, it only hunts on the way up. When it runs down again without falling, or it might even fly back down to the bottom. But it's only on the way up that it actually does its hunting, and it pokes its beak into cracks in the wood and pokes out any kind of creepy crawlies that are in there, spiders, invertebrates of all sorts, and it's well able to make a living for itself. It's like a little mouse. If you're in the woods and you stay quiet, you sit down and stay quiet and don't talk for a while, you actually might see this thing running around a tree. It's more like, you nearly think it was a mouse or something, and it's a bird. It's a really wonderful one to see, and again, it's only a woodland one. Now, here's one that has come back. This is the great spotted woodpecker. And again, we had great spotted woodpeckers in Ireland up to the great terrible thing, the great unpleasantness, if you like, in the 1600s when they lost all our trees. The woodlands were not able to maintain the woodpeckers either. And again, we had bones of those showing that they were originally here. And they came back by themselves in 2008. Dick Coombs in Wicklow heard them drumming, and then he spent a lot of time actually finding out where they're breeding, where they're nesting. And it was Dick Coombs's work with Birdwatch Ireland, and he wrote a book about it that definitely proved that the woodpeckers A, had come back, and B, were nesting. And they've done DNA analysis on the feathers, and they've come over here from Wales. Now, on a good day, if you stand up in the mountains in Wicklow, you can actually see Wales. And no doubt, if you stand on the mountains in Wales, you can see Ireland. So the woodpeckers who were under pressure in Wales because of population expansion, they were doing well. So I looked over across the Irish Sea one day and said, I'm going there. And off they went. And they have become established here. They weren't introduced. They came off their own bat. And we have enough woodlands now to maintain them. And there are records from every single county in Ireland. There's records of them drumming. They're drumming at this time of the year. They both drum, the male and the female. They don't sing the way other birds do. They don't communicate like that, but they communicate by drumming. And they're in Dublin City. There's recent records of them from the Phoenix Park. This year they've been recorded in Bushy Park even. So every single county in Ireland, every single county has recorded a woodpecker at least drumming there. And in many of them, they're breeding as well. So they've come back with a vengeance, and that is the great spotted woodpecker. It's the black and white job. We also get green woodpeckers in Britain, different one, but that one doesn't come here. It's this one is the one that we get. It's quite a big bird, about the size of I suppose, of a darling. So you won't miss this one either. You certainly wouldn't think. It's got red marks on its body there at its tail, and the male will have red on it as well. So you can certainly see red, white, and black. That's what we're looking at there. Now this one here is finch, and this one is a bird that only lives in coniferous woodlands. So it is something that likes pine cones, and indeed now with spruce plantations, it likes those too. And if you can see the bill closely, I don't know whether you can see it so well on the picture there, but it's called the crossbill because the two ends of its beak are crossed over, like it has an ingrowing toenail or something, an ingrowing beak. The two ends are too long and they're over each other. And as a consequence, your crossbill is able to poke it into the cones and push it open and get out the seeds. So these are very much confined to these places, to these coniferous woodlands. And of course, they're up in the trees. You don't normally see them very closely. You know, you go to a coniferous woodland to look for crossbills, and you hear things above your head flying over and back, and they don't come down to the ground. They actually are able to get the cones and get the seeds right up on the trees. And because there's cones on the trees all the year round, they feed on these entirely. So they're excuse me, they're typical finches in the sense that the males have all the lovely colour, and there's a male crossbill now with a kind of a sort of an orangey red plumage on it. The females are a much duller version. And this is the case in many of our bird species. You get this dimorphism, you get this business where the male have much more colourful feathers than the females, and they use this to their advantage when looking for mates. They go around showing off their lovely colours, and the women are their heads are turned by such finery, and they pick the ones with the best colours or the ones that can make the best show. Now, this is our smallest bird, and again, another bird of these coniferous woodlands. This fellow is called the goldcrest, and you can see why it's called the goldcrest. It has this lovely mark of yellow just on the top of its head. Now, this is a tiny little bird. It really, really is. And it's a little roundy bird. It's really like a little tiny golf ball or something like that with a tail on it. It's not streamlined like a bird in that sense. Other birds are long and streamlined. This thing is a little roundy ball. And again, it's a woodland bird, and it's able, with that tiny little beak, it doesn't go near cones or prise them open like the crossbill. It's able to pick up all the little insects that it can find. Now, I think the most interesting thing I read about the goldcrest is that it picks its nest out of spiders' webs. Imagine, I presume it gobbles the spider first, and then it takes away all the webs and weaves them all together, and it has the most elegant filigree nest made out of spiders' webs. So that's our goldcrest, and the goldcrest again lives in woodlands and nowhere else. So we do have a residue of woodland birds left that have always lived in the woodlands, have been able to hang in there, find all their requirements, and are able to manage. And again, you know, as there's different types of food, they have adapted to look like that. So the crossbill has the cross beak for the cones. This one has a tiny little pointy bill. It's able to pick up tiny little green flies and things that are on the leaves. looking at the woodpecker has a beak that's able to whack into the trees, and it's able to drill holes, and it feeds on things like boring beetles, various caterpillars and things like that that are inside in holes in the timber. Dutch elm disease was caused by a beetle as well, a larvae of a beetle. So these caterpillar-like larvae in the woods that eat the timber, they're the ones that the woodpecker is able to get hold of. And woodpecker is actually specially adapted so that when it whacks its head off the tree, it doesn't brain itself. It has cushioned sort of, I suppose, sort of cartilage between its beak and its brain that stop it from braining itself. So they're all adapted in different ways, so that while they're all in the woodland, they're able to feed on different types of food and not be competition for each other. And this is the best one of all. This is the woodcock. Now, the woodcock is actually a wading bird. Now, this is not the capercaillie. We saw the capercaillie at the beginning, the cock of the wood. This one is a woodcock. And the capercaillie shows off and struts about and has a leck and goes off with the lads and sounds like a horse looking for attention. This one is quite the opposite. This one absolutely doesn't want to be seen at all. It's absolutely covered in camouflage. The woodcock has its nest on the ground. It's sitting on the ground among the leaf litter, and it sits tight. If you nearly walk over it before it will get up and fly away, because the camouflage is so very good. And you can see the eyes. It's one of the very few birds that can see behind it as well as in front of it, because the eyes can see in both directions, back and front. I suppose school teachers could do with eyes like that, but these have it, and they have these stripes on their heads going across the way. Sometimes you see birds with stripes going from front to back, and they're things like snipe and that. But this one is the woodcock with the stripes going across the way. It's a wading bird and a long bill and long legs, and it pokes in through the leaves and through the leaf litter for the various creepy crawlies and worms and things that are in the leaf litter, and that's what it feeds on. So it's a ground nesting bird. Now, it has the most amazing courting flight in summertime, perhaps in the month of May when it's looking for mates, and it flies just at dusk in the most amazing style. It's called roding, R-O-D-I-N-G, and it sort of flies in the most erratic fashion. If you're around woodlands where these are towards dusk in the Maytime, and you see these strange erratic flying birds. Look, they're not going anywhere, they're doing that, and they're just showing off, which is what they're doing, showing, look how well I'm able to fly. I'd be a good one to marry if you were going to marry me. And these are the woodcock. Again, not very common. Again, anything that nests on the ground is subject to being predated on by rats and badgers and foxes and all of these other things. But its camouflage is absolutely magnificent. And we do have them here in Ireland. Now, in the strange department as well, we have the goosander. Now, the goosander is a goose, and we all know the goosander is kind of it's the same as the merganser. It's between a duck and a goose. It's that kind of a waterfowl, and it lives in the water like a normal bird like this might do. And all the rest of them live in the water and mind their own business. This goosander nests in trees, in holes in the trees. It departs from the lake where it's been happily catching fish. It has a saw-like bill the way the merganser has. It dives down, catches fish. But this yoke takes an ocean and actually nests in holes in the trees. Again, an exceedingly rare bird, but an Irish bird. And down in Wicklow, down in Glendalough, if you're down there, some of the oak trees around the lakes there have goosander nests. And the goosander's up in the tree, in the nest, lays the eggs. They're all quite safe. Nothing can get them in there. And then, then they hatch out. What do you do with your babies up a tree when they're supposed to be eating fish? I never thought of that, did I? So they all have to jump out and follow Mammy right down to the lake and get in and get going again. So it's a strange way of making a living. But to find a thing like a duck or a waterfowl in a tree in a woodland is absolutely amazing. And yet, this is its preferred habitat. This is where these birds breed. Now, this fellow is one of the tit family. This is called the long-tailed tit. And the long-tailed tit is like a spoon. Got this big long handle and the roundy bit at the front. And again, quite a small little bird. These are kind of nervous Nellies. They go around in flocks. You wouldn't see one of these by itself. And they've this kind of pinky colour on the front. And they fly through the woodlands together, hunting for, again, insects, creepy crawlies, things that are on leaves in woodlands. So when there's no leaves on the trees, it's often easier to see these than when the leaves are actually on the trees in summer. So that's the long-tailed tit. And this is the other tit. This is the coal tit. And the coal tit is not unlike the great tit, only it's kind of the black is blacker on it, and it has this white mark on the back of its neck. You know, the other ones have white patches as well on the cheeks, and I'll be coming to them later. But this one has this mark on the back of its neck. And both the coal tit and the long-tailed tits, these are birds that nest in holes in trees. So your coal tit will be looking for a proper sized hole in the tree in the woodlands where it can have a nest, and you quite often see these in woodlands. Now we have more species of tits than just long-tailed tits and coal tits, and some of the others aren't so fussy and have abandoned the woodlands. So I'll come to those now in a moment when we move out of the woods for things that weren't able to hack it. But the ones I've been showing you are just woodland birds. If you want to find any of those, you have to go to a woodland. And finally, there's this one here, the siskin. Now, the siskin is another finch. You can see, you might see if my face wasn't in the way. But anyway, its beak there is like that's the chaffinch and the siskin. They have these seed-eating beaks, which are very thick and they're able to crush seeds. And mostly the finches are actually seed-eating birds. So the siskin and the chaffinch, again, have their nests in the woodland. You often hear the chaffinch if you listen, and it has a funny sound. It goes pink, 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 kind of a warning call if you're in the woodlands and it feels that you're being threatened by you. So they're two of the finches. Now that's that. I mean, yeah, I could pick out 10 more and add those in as well, but not so much. I mean, these are the more common ones that we get all the year round in the woodlands. So if you won't get them all in every woodland, and some of them, as I said, are exceedingly rare. But they're all it's either the woodlands or the highway. They're not going to slum it anywhere else. Now there's another selection of woodland birds, and they're summer migrants, and they come to visit us in the summertime. Now we generally tend to think of summer visitors being all the seabirds that come ashore to breed because they can't lay eggs in the water. Or we think of things like swallows and swifts and house martins that are over here flying around up in the air eating the insects that are available at that time. And we think of the cuckoo as well. But there's a whole collection of other migratory birds that come here in the summertime from Africa to the woodlands. And of course, you know, if you have wonderful ears, and some people do, you're able to distinguish them by the way they sing. Because I didn't mention anything about singing before this, but one of the ways of communicating, and the main way of communicating in a woodland with other birds of your own species, is through singing. You can't see the wood for the trees, you can't see the other birds, they're small little jobs. So the way to communicate is by singing. So if you sing, you're the male, you're saying, this is my territory, I'm here, and you keep out of my territory. And by the way, if there's any women listening, I'm available. So the song that the males sing is holding on to territory, announcing that they're there, and indeed looking for mates. So these summer migrants will have spent the winter in warmer climes, and then they come here in the summertime into our woodlands, and they hide away. They don't want to be seen too much, but we can, those of us that are really good at distinguishing the songs of the birds, can distinguish them by their songs. And for the rest of us who aren't any good at this, we can get the Merlin app and hold it up. The Merlin app is a very good app, free, that you can put on your mobile phone, and it will generally tell you what the birds are. Now, quite often you get stuff on the phone that's all Google, and you're told this bird only occurs in Patagonia or somewhere, but not the Merlin one. It seems to be half decent, and it does work. Now, this one is easy. If you see this one, you know what this one is, because this one is the black cap. The clue is in the name, and you can see the male here on my right. The male is actually has a black cap, and the female then same general design, but her cap is more sort of an olivey brown colour. And again, these birds come here in summertime. They they establish themselves in the woodlands, and they will sing and establish themselves and make their presence felt. Now, there's a second lot of black caps that have hopped on. If you were here earlier, you get the best dibs. And in fact, if you stayed here all year round, you'd be better still. So there's a second lot of black caps that come here in the winter time, and you see them on your garden feeders. They come here from Germany and places like that. So we seem to have two separate ideas about blackcaps, but I'm speaking of the summer migrants, the ones that come here in the summertime. And if you're in the woodland on a dawn chorus morning and you hear all this song, one of them could very well be a blackcap. And then again, going to the other end of the colour spectrum, one of them could be the white throat. And here's your white throat. The clue is in the name, it has a white throat. Again, an African species, wonderful song, one of the earliest of these migrants. We might have them here perhaps April, where the white throat will come up and the males will sing really, really loud and establish its territory. I'm here in this woodland and I am telling you that I'm here now and this is my area and this is where I live. So that one is the white throat. And this one here then, on the other hand, is the grasshopper warbler. Now the grasshopper warbler, everything is hiding near me, but anyway, yeah, it's the grasshopper warbler sitting up there at the top. The grasshopper warbler is one of it's a whole lot of warblers. They're actually called warblers. They're a whole family of birds. And again, you'd need a PhD in bird songs generally to know the difference between one and the other. But the grasshopper warbler is easier. Grasshopper warbler sounds like one of those football rattles people used to have and twirling it around in the middle, rattly sort of noise. Or indeed, the name grasshopper warbler is the same idea. And if you hear a grasshopper, it's this sort of a sound. It's not a melodious sound like notes that you could play on an instrument. The grasshopper warbler is more of that sort of a rattly one. And there are a lot of warblers that come here. We have willow warblers and we have garden warblers and we have wood warblers, and they're all, again, million bits as far as I can know anyway of the different songs from them. But the grasshopper warbler is distinctive, and it's one of the warblers that we will get singing in the woodlands in the month of May. So these lads are all coming back in here from Africa and establishing themselves in our woodlands. This one is the spotted flycatcher. And here you are, sitting up on the perch, catching flies. So it just shows you the different. I mean, if they can all live in a woodland, they're not all eating the same thing because they wouldn't be able to survive. So each species has a slightly different food preference and, of course, then a slightly different way of nesting or bit of territory that it'll make its nest in, whether it'll be in the tree or in the ivy on the tree or further or down lower. They will all have different places for their nests. And as a consequence, you can see in some place like a woodland, a good woodland that has tall trees and smaller trees and understory and dead trees, that there's all these little niches in the habitat. And each one of these is availed of by lots of different species. I'm just talking about the birds today, but any other group of creatures will avail of all these niches as well. So the older the woodland and the bigger the trees and the longer it's there, the more of these niches you're going to have. I mean, it's National Tree Week, we're planting trees, you go out and plant trees and that's great and wonderful, but they're all the same, they're all the same age, or whatever. So the niches in them haven't developed, whereas if you have a woodland that's been there for 70, 80, 90, 200 years, you're going to have all of these different niches, different places where these different species of birds can live. And so we have a greater biodiversity as a consequence. I mean, they may all look the same and sound the same, but they actually all are in slightly different parts of the woodland. Now, I didn't put a name on this one because this one is the chiffchaff, or it might be the willow warbler. Chiffchaff and the willow warbler look exactly the same. Now, they're completely different species, and DNA analysis, all that kind of thing, will tell us this to be so. But how do I know this? And I know this because they sound different. The chiffchaff clue is in the name. What the chiffchaff does is says chiffchaff, 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 chiffchaff all day long. So if you're in the woodlands and you hear chiffchaff, chiffchaff, and you do, even I've heard that, it's the chiffchaff. And then the other one, the willow warbler, which is exactly the same, will actually have a completely different twirly. So one of these wonderful warbler songs, completely different. Now, obviously, the chiffchaff knows it's a chiffchaff, and the willow warbler knows it's a willow warbler. So there's no question of them interbreeding with each other. One only has to speak and the other realizes, oops, sorry, you're the wrong thing. And DNA analysis, of course, has shown this. But even the bird ringers, even the lads who actually, and the women who actually catch the birds and ring them, can have difficulty distinguishing between the two. And yet both of them are common birds in our woodlands. So here we have it then. Chiffchaff again here in summertime. So you could be out in the woodlands with a blackcap, grasshopper warbler, chiffchaff, all of these birds, white throat, they've come in from Africa, and indeed other ones as well. I mean, I don't want to be doing lists of birds all day, but the whole idea that a woodland is actually a place where migratory birds will come and spend the time in the summertime. Sometimes people are amazed at this because as I said, we tend to think of the more the ones that do better, we know for swallows, and swifts, and those kind of things, and we see them and we know summer has arrived. But if you're out walking in the woodlands in the month of May, if you're out for a dawn chorus, and it's a good fine sunny morning, all these warblers will appear as well, and you'll hear them in the dawn chorus. And the people whose ears are really, really good at this can distinguish every single one of them. So you can imagine why you get such a rich symphony of sound if all of these birds are contributing to this. And again, all of these birds that I'm telling you about, all of these migrants, only go to woodlands. You're not going to get them taking up residence in the shack in your hedge in the garden. You're not going to get them in somewhere like that. They want a proper woodland because they're each of them in a different niche in the woodland where their food will be. And of course, they have to build a nest and breed here as well, which is why they made the journey here from Africa in the first place. Now you have another group of birds, and they like Capercaillie. They want the best of everything. So they actually nest in the woods and then they feed nearby. So they're saying, okay, I'm a woodland bird, but actually this woodland, there's a whole lot of clearance, there's a whole lot of agricultural land. I'm going to make the best of that. And we're looking here at the buzzard. Now the buzzard is a bird of prey that formerly was exceedingly common here in Ireland. And because poisons were allowed and people used poisons to kill things they didn't want, strychnine being one of the most awful, notorious nerve thing, they were all banned, and DDT and things like that. These were all banned in the 1960s. And eventually it percolated down. And as a result, the things that were being poisoned by them weren't being poisoned any longer, like rats and foxes and things like that. So birds of prey that had been starved out of it or had in fact died from eating poison things were able to come back. And the buzzard was one of these. And the buzzard has spread right back to us by itself from Scotland over the last 30 or 40 years. A fine big bird of prey. I was looking at them yesterday. Well, this I wasn't looking much. I was driving the car on the motorway, but you could see this great bird circling around the motorway because what the buzzard does, as I said, it's like Cushla McCree's dog. It's actually nests in the woodland and hunts in the farmland. So it's in the trees, has its nest up in the tree, all the cover of the woodland, all thanks very much. But then out it comes then and hovers around farmland where there's rats, there's mice, there's open spaces it's able to nab. And again, the buzzard will catch small mammals. The buzzard will actually feed on dead things as well, roadkill, things like that. So it's quite happy to be out in the open spaces, availing of the food that's there. So it's kind of half a habitat. It's breeding. Only for the woodlands we wouldn't have it, but only for the farmlands we wouldn't have so many of. The kite is another one of these birds of prey as well. Now, the kite was also a bird that was very common here up to the 1600s. And it was actually the kites that kids play with or that people go along with a string is named after this bird because this was a bird that hovered in places. Now, this bird was very common in towns, medieval towns, because it ate all the rubbish. So they didn't bother too much about dustbin men, and they weren't too fussy about sewers and mains and drains and flushing the toilet and things like that. Those kind of things didn't exist in the 14, 15, 1600s. Horrible, smelly places. But the kites would feed on all of this waste and stuff and were sort of the dustbin men, if you like, of that era. But eventually, anyway, they all got made extinct as well, too, because it was considered when the big houses had game and they were trying to rear pheasants and the birds of prey would be eating those. So gamekeepers tended not to like a lot of birds of prey and got rid of them. And the kite is the only one with the forked tail. But again, they have reintroduced the kite. Now, they brought the kite back from Britain because it used to be here once. So by bringing back birds that used to be here and they're able to establish themselves again, it's very good for biodiversity. And these birds will nest in the woodlands, particularly if you want to see them. Go down to Avoca, down to that part of Wicklow, and there you'll see them up in the sky. But they emerge from the woodlands. They'll come to dead things. They'll kill smaller creatures in the open, rabbits, that sort of thing. And avail of the surrounding area that is not woodland, but they do need the woodland for have birds that size of big nests, and they need to have enough cover for that. This one is the sparrowhawk, and the sparrowhawk we very much see in our gardens rather than in the woodland. But the sparrowhawk has to have a nest up in a tree, and again, sparrowhawks will nest in trees in woodlands, big old pine trees, big old trees that have been there for a while, and then emerge from the woodlands, emerge from these places where they've been breeding, and go around areas with hedgerows, gardens, things like that, looking for food. And unlike the other ones I mentioned, the sparrowhawk feeds on small birds, and indeed the female sparrowhawk, as this one is here, had a go at nabbing this poor pigeon and was able to actually grab a pigeon and kill it as well. So the female sparrowhawks are stealth operators. They fly along the hedgerows and then whoosh over the hedge into your garden where the birds are at the feeder or something similar like that, and are a surprise fellow. But they again need the trees and the woodland to feed, and they need the outer space then, the areas for feeding on. And somebody here's the wood pigeon. You think the wood pigeon would live in the wood, wouldn't you? No, but again, it doesn't. The wood pigeon is so called because it isn't the feral pigeon, it isn't the dove, it isn't of course the pigeons that people used to rear long ago. This one is a wild pigeon, and again, it is supposed to be eating berries and things like this, and I suppose it must have lived in the woods at one point, but it is the one that farmers absolutely hate, because they come along and they reef the field that the farmer has planted all the seeds. Along will come a lash of the pigeons and pick them all out and eat them. They'll reef cabbages and crops like that. So they're completely vegetarian birds. Most birds that are vegetarian change over to eating creepy crawlies during the breeding season because they need protein to feed their young. But this one doesn't. This one never feeds its young with anything like that. In order to feed the young in the nest, it has this kind of cheesy solution in its crop. So the baby pigeons stick their head into mammy's mouth or daddy's mouth and suck up this cheesy stuff that comes up from the crop. Charming. But it does mean that you're not confined to having your babies like other birds do when there's leaves on the trees and creepy crawlies on the leaves. Most of our birds breed in the summertime because all the food is there. Pigeons can breed all the year round. And in fact, you can get baby pigeons any month of the year because they're not depending on leaves and creepy crawlies and protein like that. They can get it from their mother. So they're the ones that go coo, 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 the 5 notes, and they're the wood pigeons. So while they're called the wood pigeons, their connection with the woodland is pretty tenuous. If we didn't have so much farmland, if we didn't have so much crops and arable land, we wouldn't have so many wood pigeons. And then finally, I'm coming to the garden birds. Now, the garden birds are the ones that said, here, lads, if you're going to get into the woodlands, well, we're not going away. We'll go to wherever we can find any class of a bit of an old tree or a hedge or shack or something, and we live there. So these birds that I'm going to show you now that we very much consider to be our garden birds originally were woodland birds, but weren't so fussy, weren't saying, well, it's the woods or nothing for us. They were able to adjust, and of course, we loved them in the garden. So this one is the great tit, the one that doesn't have the white mark on the back of its neck, and it's kind of more yellow than the cold tit. And of course, this is the other one then, the blue tit. And both of these will come to nest boxes, will feed on feeders. You put out your feeders, everybody has their feeders out at the moment, and it's wonderful food for both of these different tit species, one being bigger than the other. If you get a nest box with the right size hole, you can have one rather than the other in your garden. If you get one with a smaller hole, the great tit can't get in, and you will have blue tits. This one is the robin, and again, the robin is a woodland bird, and this is why all of these garden birds sing so much, because they communicate in the woodlands. That was how they communicated long ago, and they haven't lost this ability of being able to sing. So here's your male robin singing in summertime, singing in the dawn chorus, saying, "This is my territory, and I'll be dug out of any other bird that comes near me." And of course, robins are very aggressive birds. I don't know what they're doing on Christmas cards, where you have a whole row of robins. Robins can't abide any other robins. And in fact, female robins look exactly the same. And the male doesn't recognize a female when she comes into the garden. He's busy singing in the garden, saying, "This is my garden." And I'll bloody well burst anyone who comes in that's another robin. And then he's trying to find a mate as well. And when the female comes in, he thinks it's another male and goes off to attack her. And I think could end up very sadly indeed. Only female robins, of course, have more sense than males and don't fight back. And so they'll have a nest in your garden, and you can have 4 or 5 young in wonderful places like this with ivy on trees. The ivy is a colour, ivy is a cover on the tree, and it's a place then for shelter for the robins. And the robins with their little beaks like that can feed on all sorts of different types of creepy crawlies. I know people always say, do robins eat worms? No, they don't. They like stuffing 6 pounds of sausages into your tiny baby's mouth. Worms are huge. It's bigger birds that feed on worms. Robins feed on smaller creatures that they will peck around on the ground. You see them looking under stones. You see them finding things like woodlice and spiders and earwigs, small little things like this. But it's interesting. The babies open their mouths, and that's what stimulates the parents to feed them. If you didn't open your mouth, you wouldn't get it. But they don't have any red feathers. The young robins haven't got red feathers, because if they did, Daddy would hate them. Daddy would throw them out. He doesn't like any competition. He can barely tolerate Mammy, and he certainly isn't having upstarts with red breasts on them in the nest. So baby robins, don't get their red feathers until long after they've fledged, long after they've left the nest. And people often see these birds in the garden in the summertime with look like robins, but they haven't got the red feathers. What could they possibly be? They're robins, baby robins, this year's robins. They'll only get their red feathers when they molt again later on in the year. Blackbirds, of course, are very much woodland birds from the point of view of their song, but again, they have adapted to living in our gardens, and they are really, really suited to gardens. I mean, Dublin City, any city, at dusk, if you wait now in the evening time, you can hear the blackbirds singing, and they're the ones that actually have the same notes as ourselves. Even I can recognise the song of a blackbird, and they can whistle back at it, and the poor blackbird thinks you're another blackbird and comes over to investigate if you're up to that kind of thing. But blackbirds, of course, then, like some of these other birds, are able to survive the winter because they are omnivores. They're not just depending on protein, they're not just depending on insects, because obviously these things are much less abundant in the wintertime. And blackbirds, and indeed robins and other birds like that, are able to feed on berries. So if you have plants in your garden with lots of berries, they don't have to be native trees at all. This is a cotoneaster, which is a fine plant with berries on it, but not necessarily native. So native things in woodlands and the animals that live there are adapted to that. But in your gardens, these garden birds have been very adaptable. They've abandoned their woodland, they've come into our gardens, and they're very happy to eat anything that they can eat and survive. They don't care where it came from. So, by planting any kind of plants in your gardens that have flowers in springtime and seeds and berries in the autumn time, you're really doing a good job to help out birds like this that really need all the help they can get. With cold weather now for the last couple of days, you can imagine how hard it is for birds, because they only feed during the daytime. The days are quite short, and they have to eat enough food to keep themselves warm at night. And the temperature has been very low in the last while. So having food for the birds in the garden is certainly a very good idea. This is another garden bird. This is the wren. Now, the wren, again, somewhat like what you call it, the tree creeper. It skulks about. Now, it doesn't climb up trees, but it doesn't fly around. If you saw a wren, it's sort of running around the garden under flower pots looking at things. And you think it was kind of a mouse running around rather than a bird. And it's a different habitat on the ground rather than up in the tree. There are two types of thrush. We get the big thrush. This is one called the mistle thrush, and the mistle thrush is very fond of berries, particularly that's on a mountain ash, but you get it also on holly. It'll defend the holly tree and bait off all the other birds that might want to eat the holly berries. So sometimes you hear a mistle thrush making a terrible racket, and it's minding its holly bush from other would-be invaders. And the other thrush then is the song thrush, the ones that we more frequently see in our gardens. And again, these are the ones that can feed on worms, they can feed on snails. I mean, they're big enough now to eat a worm and bring it home to the young. But these are all our garden birds, but formerly were woodland birds, and they have retained this business of being able to sing, being able to communicate by song, because that was how you managed, though when you lived in the woods and you couldn't see any other birds that don't do this. Things like ravens show off by flying most wonderfully. Seabirds are black and white, and they can communicate visually. Woodland birds and the garden birds, because of so much trees, had to communicate by song. So we have, as a consequence of these being woodland birds, we have this wonderful dawn chorus, which will be happening soon enough the birds are beginning to come and we'll have our migrants back. And woodlands are wonderful places now, but they're even more wonderful as we move through spring into summer, and all of these habitats are filled with the native things that belong to them there. So I leave it at that. Thank you all very much. And I'll go back to Brendan now. There
Thank
you
you
are,
very
Brendan.
much for that, Éanna. Just one or two questions have popped up. The other one is that we've reintroduced a lot of raptors into the country. I mean, they haven't come back naturally like the wood pigeon. So why do we not bring back the Capercaillie?
Well, first of all, you don't mean the wood pigeon. I presume you mean the woodpecker.
The woodpecker, sorry.
Yeah. The raptors. Now, you see, I don't know why they haven't brought back the capercaillie. You see, you have to have habitat for it, and that's the thing. If the capercaillie is feeding on pine shoots and things like that, we don't really have enough pine forests for that, for them to sustain them. Because when we joined the EU, we had to do all kinds of environmental things that were required of us. And one of the things was we were meant to do studies of things that were here once and see would it be a good idea to bring them back. And they did studies of the golden eagle. Yes, that would be a good idea to bring it back. They did the white-tailed sea eagle. That'd be a good idea. They did the osprey they brought back. They did the wolf. And they decided, no, that wouldn't be a good idea to bring that back at the moment because we don't have the habitat for it. We've too many sheep. We haven't enough woodland. And similarly with the capercaillie, there's no point in bringing it back bare and baldy. I mean, the reason why it went all those years ago was because the habitat that it lived in was no longer there for it. So no point in bringing it back bare and baldy until you have the pine forests for it. So you really have to get the place suitable for it to live in before you can bring it back. We are an island, so things won't come back by themselves. But there's no point in bringing something here if it isn't going to work. And sometimes you think it's going to work and it doesn't work as well as it might. I mean, the white-tailed sea eagle are doing much better than the golden eagles, even though they're both breeding here, but one is doing much better than the other. So, it's a big job reintroducing the species and you want to make sure that it'll work. So I don't hear anything about bringing back the capercaillie yet. It's a great looking yoke, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, it's surprising. Does the Capercaillie specifically need pine forests, or will any conifer do?
Well, I don't know about any conifer. Certainly, the spruce plantations seem to suit it as well. They brought it back into Scotland.
Yeah,
They've
because we
more
have we've
and
gone from like 1% to 10% forestry. How much more do we need to forest before the old Capercaillie's happy to come back?
I don't know, but it probably needs young growing shoots and that. And with the greatest of respects to our forestries, they're grown for timber. They're grown for wood for timber purposes, so they're all the same. And that's you wouldn't have a mixed variety of older ones and younger ones and new ones and that. Maybe you do need a greater diversity even in the spruce forest for them. Anyway, I will note it. I'll ask the bird people why are we not bringing back the capercaillie.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be easier than bringing back the wolf, I'd imagine, even though the wolf
Well,
would
another
have.
story.
I
There's
don't,
no talk about bringing that back at all, and that's
I
not
don't
going to
know if
happen.
eating sheep is really to be frowned upon. I mean, we do it. But anyway,
Probably Brendan wished.
next was what other birds that used to be here we've lost or just simply didn't come here that the UK have reasonably commonly and we don't, and why not?
Well, there's a wonderful thing called the nuthatch. The nuthatch, I've seen those in Britain myself, and they're like the opposite to the tree creeper. As I was saying, the tree creeper goes round and round eating on the way up, and then it flies down and does it again. The nuthatch goes round and round the other way, and it only eats on the way down. And as a result, the two can live in harmony. I've eaten all the lads on the way up, and you eat all the lads on the way down. But they're very sedentary birds, and the nuthatch, I don't think we ever had the nuthatch here. You see, we got our stuff after the last ice age, and we had 1,000 years being joined to Britain, being joined to Europe, and then we got cut off. So maybe the nuthatch was a bit slower and never got here in the first instance. There's no records of us ever having had nuthatches, but they obviously made it to Britain and did very well there.
Yeah,
They have a couple of species of woodpecker in Britain. They have the great spotted woodpecker and they have the less small spotted woodpecker, and they also have a green woodpecker as well in the southern part of England, which we don't have. That didn't make it here either. And again, there's no talk of introducing them. The southern part of England, right down along the south coast, is a different kind of habitat to what we have here. It's warmer, it's drier. They have beech woodlands as native woodland. So there is habitat in Britain that we don't have here in Ireland, and the birds that were in those habitats never got as far as here. I mean, owls are a typical example. We just have the barn owl and the long-eared owl. In Britain, they have the tawny owl as well, too, whit, do, woo. And, you get ads on the
So you're
Irish.
saying if we established some more extensive beech woodlands, we might then have a habitat suitable for greater biodiversity of birds.
I mean, if you establish a different type of woodland with a different variety of trees and habitats in it, yes, of course you would, because that would be different conditions. Birds can fly though, so they're more likely to come by themselves rather than say other things that can't. So,
Yeah,
while
that
you
was
might
the other thing struck me.
bring them,
I can
but
understand why we don't have land animals, but it's only what, a few miles in some parts from here to the UK mainland, and they can fly.
they can fly. So why aren't they all here? Indeed, yeah. So it's a matter of habitat. I mean, maybe they are here and we haven't discovered them yet as well too. That happens. We introduced the osprey this year. We were all delighted with this, and discovered there were two pairs above in Fermanagh breeding away quite happily, and nobody knew about them at all. Or at least not enough people knew about them. No, they're not woodland birds. They're wetland birds, but still, so they can come back of their own bat as well.
Okay, that's all the questions I have here. So I think
Well, obviously, it was such a clear lecture, Brendan. Nobody needed to ask any questions.
it was very clear, and thank you very much, Éanna, for yet again doing an excellent webinar. And we hope to see you again shortly on some other topic.
And it has been recorded, I believe, Siobhan, has it, so that people can get it online if they want.
It'll be on our YouTube channel afterward. Yeah.
Great. Well,
Okay.
without any further ado, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, cheers. And goodbye, everybody, for attending and listening.
Thank you.
All the best. Happy National Tree Week.
Yeah, exactly.